Now, what does it mean that Poland invoked Article 4 of the NATO treaty, and how serious is that?
So Article 4 essentially requires all members to come together to consult with each other about, potential actions going forward, but doesn't necessarily amount to collective defense in the same way that Article 5 does. So this is quite significant because it's the first time, during the Ukraine war that this article has been invoked and suggests that there is an increasing understanding that NATO will have to get directly involved in some degree in the war against Russia. Uh, because Russia obviously is not really respecting NATO sovereignty here.
And could this lead to the deployment of more NATO assets like air defense systems in Poland or neighboring regions?
It is unclear. So just to give some context, last night, Russia sent about 410, 415 drones into Ukraine, as well as 40 missiles. And then it also sent about 19 or so drones into Poland, but often through Belarusian airspace. And so essentially what happened is that these drones came in through Belarus, flew into Poland, and then seemingly were supposed to loop back and attack Ukraine through Polish airspace, therefore bypassing Ukrainian air defenses. However, at least one of these drones went very deep into Polish territory, landing basically in the center of the country, which indicates that maybe these targets weren't just supposed to be for Ukrainians. Now, this action has been understood as a way for Russia to test NATO, to test NATO's resolve, because what Russia is very good at is essentially pushing the lines of what's acceptable little by little by little by little and eroding norms incrementally. So basically applying just enough pressure that Western states are too scared to do anything about it because they always want to, maintain peace and not create a problem, but slowly shifting the window of what is appropriate to benefit Russia's actions. Uh, so, will we see NATO deploy more air defenses to Ukraine? Maybe. I think the question here is how Poland responds. If Poland thinks that this is a significant violation of its sovereignty and that changes its stance so that it becomes more aggressively pro-Ukrainian, then sure, that's a possibility. But I mean, you would likely see more defenses deployed to Poland's borders to ensure that any drones that do come into Polish territory are intercepted properly and quickly.
Now, Belarus came out and claimed that the drones were jammed and went off course. Does that explanation hold up at all, or does it just seem like an excuse?
It just seems like an excuse, to be honest. Like,
Mhm.
you know, we've had past incidents where drones have landed in in Polish territory very near the border. And in those cases, it seemed like there was, they were just jammed, that they got lost, and that was just a mistake. But here you had a very large number of drones, many of which were going in the same direction, some of which, just kept on going all the way in Poland in a way that doesn't suggest that, this was an accident. When you have all these drones going in the same direction, there's an element of coordination here. And the fact that they seem to be looping back into Ukraine suggests a strategic logic behind their path. So no one is taking the Belarusian narrative seriously. Everyone thinks that this is intentional.
And do you think with what happened, this might actually light a bit of a fire under NATO and make them take these threats or potential threats a little bit more serious? I mean, if Poland is invoking Article 4, obviously Poland is viewing this as very serious. So do you think NATO will get behind this now and say, you know what, we do have to stand up to Russia and maybe it's time to do something?
Maybe I think for the Western NATO states that's unlikely because they really aren't feeling the war on their doorstep. I think the more important effect here will be on Polish politics because the Poles at the very beginning of the war were very, very pro-Ukrainian, like rabidly so. It was great. Someone who's been in Ukraine, everyone loved the Poles. But then over time, Poles grew cool on Ukraine, and part of the reason there is that they felt that Ukrainian refugees were getting too much support or that they weren't being grateful enough. I think part of that was informed by the fact that the Ukrainian refugees who did end up in Poland were often on the wealthier side because if you can leave Ukraine, you often have the means to do so. So people were seeing refugees who, had a decent income and thought, well, why are we supporting them? Meanwhile, the ones who couldn't afford to stay there basically went back home. Uh, and we saw that, with the election of a relatively anti-Ukrainian president in Poland recently. And granted, the president has limited powers here, but he, for example, vetoed more assistance to Ukrainian refugees, right? So he was a symptom of this larger sense of alienation, of anti-Ukrainian sentiment. So now, if you have if the polls see that this war is coming to their doorstep little by little, maybe that will shift things back to where they were back in 2022 and 2023 and, turn Poland back into the stalwart uh, advocate for Ukraine that it once was.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks for having me.